For nearly 4 decades, the world ran on a single governing assumption, so elegant that it felt inevitable. If nations traded deeply enough with one another, war would become irrational. Economic interdependence was supposed to act as a global restraint system. If factories in East Asia depended on consumers in the West, and Western governments depended on Asian savings to finance their debts, then conflict would simply cost too much to contemplate. This belief became the invisible operating system of the modern world. It shaped policy, corporate strategy, and even how ordinary people understood progress. Out of that belief emerged a hyper-efficient planetary machine. Products were no longer made in one country from start to finish. They were assembled from fragments of the world. A single smartphone could be conceptualized in Silicon Valley, rely on precision tools from Europe, advanced chips from East Asia, raw minerals from Africa, and low-cost assembly lines in China. Borders still existed for people, but for capital and supply chains they became increasingly irrelevant. Efficiency was king. Speed mattered more than resilience. Cost mattered more than redundancy. That world is not slowly fading away. It is being dismantled in real time. The era of seamless globalization is ending, and in its place, a far more fragmented system is emerging. The global economy is splitting into rival camps that no longer trust each other enough to share the foundations of modern life. This is the age of economic balkanization, where one integrated marketplace is giving way to separate, hostile spheres with incompatible rules, technologies, and financial systems. On one side stands a Western-aligned bloc anchored by the United States, the G7, NATO, and key partners in the Pacific. On the other is a Eurasian-centered network led by China and Russia, closely linked with Iran and an expanding circle of states across the global south. This is not a short-term dispute over tariffs or trade imbalances. It is a structural divorce that is reorganizing how the human race produces, exchanges, and stores value. The trigger for this rupture was a sobering realization. The very interdependence that was supposed to prevent conflict had quietly turned into leverage. When the pandemic struck and war returned to Europe, Western governments discovered that efficiency had come at a dangerous price. Europe learned it had handed control of its energy lifeline to Russia. The United States discovered that essential medicines, protective equipment, and even much of its industrial capacity depended on Chinese supply chains. The system that maximized profits in good times proved fragile in crisis. In response, the language of global commerce changed almost overnight. Free trade was replaced with phrases like de-risking, reshoring, and friendshoring. These terms sound technical and harmless, but their meaning is blunt. Political alignment now determines economic trust. If a country is not firmly in your camp, it is no longer considered a dependable supplier. Trade is no longer about efficiency alone, it is about loyalty. This shift is producing a new kind of barrier. Unlike the physical walls of the 20th century, today's divisions are built from regulations, export bans, software restrictions, and incompatible standards. A digital iron curtain is descending, and nowhere is this more visible than in the transformation of the Internet itself. For years, the Internet was imagined as a shared global space, a neutral network connecting people regardless of geography. That vision is collapsing. In its place is a fragmented digital world. In the Western sphere, online life revolves around American technology giants, constrained by European regulatory regimes and increasingly intertwined with security agencies tasked with monitoring information flows. In the Eastern sphere, the Internet functions as a tightly controlled national ecosystem. It operates behind extensive digital borders, relies on domestic platforms for communication and commerce, and uses alternative navigation systems, payment networks, and cloud infrastructure. This divergence goes far beyond content moderation or censorship. It reaches into the physical architecture of modern technology. Governments in the West are systematically removing Chinese-made telecommunications equipment from their networks and pressuring allies to follow suit. Standards for hardware and software are drifting apart. The result is a future where devices purchased in different parts of the world may struggle to interact because they are built on fundamentally different technological assumptions. For multinational corporations, this fragmentation creates a crisis with no easy solution. For decades, global firms hedged their risks by spreading production across multiple countries, while keeping China at the center of their operations. That approach is no longer sustainable. Companies are now being forced to align themselves decisively with one bloc or the other. For firms deeply exposed to China, geopolitical risk has become a direct threat to shareholder value. At the same time, Western businesses operating within China face mounting pressure to localize, hand over technology, or exit altogether. The age of the politically neutral global corporation is coming to an end. Firms are being sorted into categories defined by national allegiance. They will be regulated, subsidized, and punished accordingly. Economic identity is becoming inseparable from geopolitical alignment. Nowhere is this more consequential than in the world's financial system. For decades, global finance revolved around a single core currency. The US dollar served as the primary reserve asset, not because every country admired American policy, but because the system was perceived as predictable and apolitical. That assumption shattered when Western governments froze hundreds of billions of dollars in Russian central bank reserves. The message was unmistakable. Access to the global financial system was conditional, and money held in dollars was only safe if one remained on the right side of geopolitics. This shock accelerated a slow-moving but profound shift. Countries outside the Western Bloc began searching for ways to reduce their dependence on the dollar, not because alternative currencies were superior, but because reliance on a weaponized system had become too risky. In response, a parallel financial ecosystem is taking shape. Energy, commodities, and weapons are increasingly traded through arrangements that bypass traditional Western clearing systems. These transactions are often clumsy and inefficient, but they offer something far more valuable to authoritarian regimes: insulation from external pressure. At the same time, a new group of countries is exploiting the space between the blocs. Large middle powers are refusing to fully commit to either side. They trade with everyone, extract concessions from rivals, and profit from the gaps in the system. By acting as intermediaries, refiners, and logistical hubs, they have turned fragmentation into opportunity. But this strategy is becoming harder to sustain as pressure mounts. Both major blocs are beginning to demand clearer loyalty, and the cost of sitting on the fence is rising. The tragedy of this transformation is that it undermines humanity's ability to confront shared existential threats. Problems like climate change, global health crises, and the risks posed by advanced artificial intelligence cannot be solved within isolated economic fortresses. They require cooperation at a planetary scale. Yet, cooperation is precisely what economic balkanization erodes. Trade disputes spill into scientific collaboration. Technology controls restrict data sharing. Strategic mistrust poisons efforts to coordinate long-term solutions. As the economic divorce deepens, the conflict is moving into more tangible territory. The struggle is no longer just about tariffs or trade agreements. It is being fought in semiconductor fabrication plants, mineral supply chains, and energy infrastructure. Export controls have replaced import taxes as the primary weapon. Instead of making foreign goods more expensive, governments are trying to deny rivals access to the technologies required for future growth. This strategy reached a turning point when sweeping restrictions were placed on the sale of advanced computing technology to China. These measures did not simply target specific products. They extended American jurisdiction across global supply chains by asserting control over any item produced using U.S. origin technology or intellectual property. Even foreign firms found themselves bound by these rules. The effect was to sever China from the most advanced tools required for cutting-edge artificial intelligence and military applications. In response, China turned to a different kind of leverage. While it lagged behind in certain advanced technologies, it dominated the processing and refining of critical raw materials. By imposing its own export controls on obscure but essential elements, Beijing demonstrated how vulnerable modern economies had become. Advanced weapon systems, renewable energy infrastructure, and electric vehicles all depend on materials that flow through Chinese-controlled supply chains. Disrupt those flows, and entire industries grind to a halt. This standoff exposes a deeper contradiction at the heart of Western policy. Governments have committed themselves to ambitious environmental targets while simultaneously trying to isolate the world's largest supplier of green technology. Solar panels, batteries, and critical minerals are overwhelmingly produced or processed in China. Efforts to decouple for security reasons directly conflict with climate goals. The result is higher costs, slower adoption, and growing public resistance as consumers absorb the price of geopolitical rivalry. To compensate, Western countries are embarking on massive programs of Governments are subsidizing factories, rebuilding domestic supply chains, and duplicating capacity that already exists elsewhere. While this creates jobs and political capital at home, it comes at a significant economic cost. Redundancy replaces specialization. Scale efficiencies are lost. Inflation becomes structural rather than cyclical. This fragmentation is also producing a quiet but consequential war over standards. Technologies that once relied on shared protocols are diverging. Infrastructure projects are increasingly built to be compatible only within a single sphere. Countries choosing one system risk locking themselves out of the other. What appears to be a technical decision today can become a strategic dependency tomorrow. Perhaps the most dangerous effect of economic balkanization is what it does to incentives for peace. Trade has historically acted as a brake on conflict by raising the cost of war. As ties are cut and dependencies unwound, that restraint weakens. Supply chains are being redesigned, not just for efficiency, but for survivability in conflict. Economic preparation for separation begins to resemble preparation for war. The financial dimension of this split runs even deeper. As capital flows fragment, governments grow increasingly anxious about money leaving their control. Wealth becomes something to be managed, monitored, and, if necessary, restrained in the name of national security. Capital controls are tightening. Surveillance of financial transactions is expanding. Private savings are increasingly viewed not as individual property, but as a resource to be mobilized. History offers sobering reminders of where this logic can lead. In moments of crisis, states have repeatedly rewritten the rules of ownership to preserve themselves. Modern financial systems make such interventions easier than ever. Wealth today is largely digital, recorded in databases governed by institutions subject to state authority. When pressure mounts, permissions can be changed with a keystroke. The direction of travel is unmistakable. As the world divides into rival economic fortresses, the promise of globalization is being replaced by a doctrine of control. Control over supply chains, control over technology, control over capital. The fragmentation reshaping global trade is also reshaping the relationship between individuals and the systems that hold their wealth. The Iron Curtain of the 21st century is not only descending between nations, it is closing in around the economic freedom of the individual, redefining what ownership, security, and sovereignty mean in a fractured world. Hey everyone! If you enjoyed this video and want to stay updated with more insights on finance, make sure to subscribe to my channel, Financial Coin, and don't forget to hit that bell icon so you never miss our latest videos.